when you're learning so much that's new and you're not necessarily very good at it because it's so new. Consulting was a brand new area. Leave India out for a second, my time in India. I'll talk about my time in the US.
Yeah.
Being in consulting, strategy consulting is not easy because here you are, a newly minted MBA student, going into the seats of power in company and telling them how they might want to think about their business or the issues differently than they have been doing all the time, all the years before you got there. It's a scary situation to be in. It's a sort of a heady situation also because you feel very important, but that's not what you should focus on. You should focus on the job that you've been given, which means you've got to zoom in, understand the business, and zoom out and say, what do they need to do differently? You know, I got pretty good at it, but in the early years, I either got caught in the minutiae or I tried to be too strategic. It's that constant zooming in and zooming out that you have to learn.
Yeah.
And if you don't get that balance right, you either end up with nitty-gritty suggestions which really are not relevant, or too strategic recommendation which nobody can implement. Striking that right balance, I had to learn that.
Yeah.
I needed to have good bosses who taught me how to do that. And you had to listen and watch and learn. And take some harsh feedback from both your people at BCG and the client organizations who say, why'd you bring this woman here? She doesn't know what she's talking about. You never want that more than once. So you have to be a continuously reinventing person. Reinvent yourself, learn, reinvent, watch, observe, listen. Not just people in your own company, people outside the company. Watch, learn, listen. That cycle made me a better person, but it was painful along the way. When you see your performance appraisals that are so terrible, you go, oh my God, what have I done? But then don't get bogged down by the performance appraisal. Say, hey, this performance appraisal is a valuable learning tool so that you can get better at the next assignment.
There's an exchange in Brecht's famous play, The Life of Galileo, where one person says that unhappy is the country without heroes, and the teacher replies, no, unhappy is the country that needs heroes. So you can really take both sides of this. And Tolstoy says heroic power isn't even possible, because whereas the classic view, people like Thomas Carlyle, the British essayist, who had this whole idea of the hero with his mastery and control over the social and political circumstances in which he operates, Tolstoy said that history shapes and determines leaders. Individual leaders are greatly limited by forces and constraints that are beyond their control. Kings and generals, Tolstoy wrote, are merely history's slaves. And they're often riding the crest of historical waves that are beyond their comprehension, let alone their control. So they think they're acting out of free will, but it's involuntary, according to Tolstoy. It's all just the course of history. Whereas the other view, the heroic view, is that history is nothing but the biography of great men, great kings, and so on and so forth. So you've got a mixed view as well, which says, yes, large sweeping historical forces exist, but individuals have a role in epitomizing them, sometimes harnessing them. And the energy of an individual can be one of the forces that brings a historical force into being and gets it done. So an individual of talent can become a social force. It's a view of a chap called Georgy Plekhanov, who was a Russian writer before the Soviet era, who talked about this. And his argument was talented people can change features of events, but not their general trend. So he's kind of halfway between Tolstoy and Carlyle, right? And so you've got all of these views possible. Even in the 20th century, there have been big discussions on what kind of history, what kind of heroic leadership is possible. I personally will reveal my bias. I'm not a big believer in heroic leadership because we've seen this in our own country in the last 7 or 8 years. We've had a leader who's been all about I, me. I'm the great hero on the white stallion with upraised sword who's going to charge down, cut through all the Gordian knots of all your problems and solve all the difficulties because I have all the answers. I know what to do. And we've seen how that hasn't worked in the last several years. So I rather take the view of one of the great heroes of the 19th century, Bismarck, who unified Germany and made it a strong world power. He says that essentially uh, my influence, he said, on the events I took advantage of is usually exaggerated. We can't make history, he basically said, about any individual, any more than we can make fruits ripen more quickly by subjecting it to the heat of a lamp. So that's where the question of individuals come in.
You have to stop thinking about money as money. Very often, when we all begin our investing, trading careers, we kind of start, you lose a big surplus of money, that's like a car you intended to buy, or a holiday you intended to go on, or a home you intended to pay off with that capital. When you think about money in those terms, it becomes very hard to be unattached and totally objective with the decisions you're making. I think very first thing, this will be different for everybody. For many people, it's experience and time in the market. But stop thinking about money as money. Stop thinking about money as tangible goods in the real world. Start to think about money as, like fake monopoly money or playing chips that you have at a game that you're playing. And the intention of the game is to beat the other people at the game. Most of the trading I do is in the derivative ecosystem where it's a net zero sum game. Nobody is making money or losing money, but if there are a group of 100, the net outcome of the gains and the profit gains and the losses is essentially zero. So I would say first thing would be that to kind of like remove any emotion attached to money in whatever sense. This will sound bad, but like being stoic in life is generally considered to be a bad thing. It puts you in a position where you're terrible at relationships, you're very unreactive, you lack the basic emotion that many people show when events occur around them with people they care for. But I think that same attitude, stoicism, kind of does very well in the equity markets because it allows for you to be 100% objective. So I think first and foremost would be uh, curtailing emotion. At the end of the day, stock markets are as much about psychology as they are about being able to read fundamentals or follow technicals. I think you have to understand that the price of a certain equity goes up or down, not because of great results, not because of a technical pattern on the chart which is getting replicated after a certain amount of time. At the end of the day, things go up or down based on what people are doing and how people around you perceive what will happen tomorrow. Like,
Right.
take the example of Corona, for example, right? Like, the same Corona numbers of today were there in March last year during the pandemic, and the market was down 30%. We have the same Corona trouble now, if not more than we had in March last year. But people are reacting to it in a manner which is so different from what they did last year. So it comes down to that. It comes down to being able to read what people around you are doing, thinking, and be able to kind of uh, guess what they will think and do in the future as well.
The biggest method is that uh, I think in some ways we need to know who we serve. Like we are very, like I'm very clear. We don't serve women who are, vice presidents in Microsoft. Not that they're not welcome, but that person has enough. She's on LinkedIn. She's sort of like set for success. The woman we serve is the woman Ekta Kapoor makes serials for. The woman we serve is the woman in Bareli Ki Barfi. The woman we serve is in English English. She's really a woman who's invisible in the society in her home. So she uses her me space. So what's the first thing that we do? Like, what's our first hook? Like, if you had to literally do one thing, we will just be a safe space to express yourself. So you come, hang out, make your post. You're like, there are women who who actually end up making their first selfie on the internet on Cheetos, right? And they wouldn't put that selfie ever outside, right? So things like, so who are we? We're a safe, trusted space, basically.
Mm.
I mean, that's really like the the core of the platform. And like, as a company, we have done humongous investment in safety and trust, right? Like every
Mhm.
quarter we release something that enhances that, right? Like we just
Mhm.
introduced a feature where you can't enter Shiros without a selfie, right? And that selfie is machine read, and like everybody's like sort of, so so we're just a safe space. And the thesis as a founder is, when you're safe, you grow. We all grow when we don't feel judged, right? When we feel nurtured in a space. And I think Indian women lack that space. You know, we like, we're a mom, and we're a wife, we're a sister, we're a daughter, but we're never us, right? Like there's no space for us. And and the
Yeah.
deeper you go in India, that space doesn't exist. So at heart, that's what is Shreya's. And then we
Yeah.
started adding other things, right? So uh, and just sort of, again, listening from users to say, like, what do you want, what is it that a lot of our features, just like how you see on Twitter, a lot of features came because users suggested, like the hashtag was a user
Yeah.
suggest, and a lot of these things. So we have a lot of features that are user suggested. Ma'am, we want chat. Like every year I do a poll around December to say, aapko agle saal kya chahiye, what do you want next year from Shiros? So, ma'am, we want videos, ma'am, we want chat, ma'am, we want to put our own community, uh, we want to migrate our group from WhatsApp to Shiros. So, like, we listen in, and ma'am, please make sure no men can enter. So, like, a lot of it really comes from there. And then, of course, to say, ma'am, I want to earn money, ma'am, we want remote work, and things like that. And then, of course, I think we have a lot of these AMAs. Like every Monday, I put out our calendar, I tweet it also.
Yeah.
So a lot of it has come from listening. But if you boil everything down, we're still a safe space. That's high trust. You can be you. There are no filters, and everything else is an emergent from that, including the
Got it.
bank. Like, and of course, uh, with the bank, we're building a banking platform which is separate, but will have some sort of pipes. The other thing is just looking at our own data, right? Like more and more users are coming from tier two, tier three. Aspirations are around first income, identity, safety. Like I got a request to say, ma'am, please put an apps lock on Shiros. Like we're not even a financial law app. There are no transactions. Why do you want to like apps lock? I don't want my family to see what I do on Shiros.
Mm.
So it really emerged from there. And then, of course, we also and as a founder, the other challenge we had was 70-80% of internet traffic in India is men. So we couldn't use traditional channels to reach out to women. Like we don't do Facebook ads, we don't do a lot of ad spends, because there are a lot of fake profiles on the internet. And the moment you say app for women, all the men come in. Like it's a really weird problem to have. So we had to sort of also do, like, we've acquired a lot of companies. We've acquired 6 companies in the process. Anybody who was building for women, we went and sort of spoke to them to say, or anybody who had, like, who increased our ability to increase our surface area on the internet for women, we kind of brought them into the family.
You pick a few things and you really focus on that. And what's contrarian is you say no to everything else. And that's very, very hard. It's very hard because of 2 reasons. One, people always constantly talk about innovation, right? And they constantly want you to try out the next new thing, right? So it takes a lot of discipline to be able to say no to something, and no to 10 new ideas. The second is that human beings, our brain is wired as such, is that we're constantly, getting distracted by the next new thing. But our attention goes to whatever walked into the room. So therefore, it takes a lot of discipline to say no to this, no to that, no to a separate check-in line, no to a frequent flyer line, no to a frequent flyer points, no to hot food, and no to um, fancy cars, and all kinds of things like that, right? and just stay disciplined on what really matters. But one of the larger decisions was back in 2008-9 itself. You know, our market share went from about 8-9% to something like 14%, and we were still not making money. And then we decided that we are going to actually cut back and reduce market share, but focus on profitability. And market share dropped from 14 to 11%, but we started making money. Now, when your airline is shrinking and the newspapers are telling you every day that the airline is shrinking and you're becoming smaller in terms of market share, and you're still chasing profitability, but that's not yet happened, it takes a lot of, you know, courage and discipline to be able to do that. And I think that was one. And then there were many others, but this was one where it's really out there, you know, in the public domain, and everybody's saying things about you. And in the airline business, of course, everybody has an opinion. And I think that is one of the best examples that I can give you, which is a hard, difficult decision to take.
You know, as a young professional, you are always self-doubting yourself. You're always second-guessing yourself because you don't know better. You know, you're just out of college. You have, by sheer nature of luck, blessing, karma, whatever we want to term that, you are in a place, right? And you're supposed to be doing these things. And you have had no background in that. You've had no training. College doesn't prepare you for that. So places like what you all are creating today will give millennials who are getting into workforce, middle management, hear these conversations. When we were there, we didn't even know who to check with, right? You're in front of an office with a laptop and you're presenting something. You don't know how that goes. You don't know whether, you know, you have this, in your head, you have this entire prestige and honor of your country, of your company, and you need to do it right. And these are the customers that we worked with, whose belief in me that the fact that, you know, they're trying to do this out of India and this will work. First generation outsourcing, end-to-end outsourcing, business transformation of a division of a large brand. And that belief kept me going, Utkarsh. The belief that your hard work combined with someone's belief in your hard work and your ability to keep striving and persevering was number one. Second, I consciously made an effort to put blinkers on and keep working. So I had that belief that the more you work, the more experience you will get, right? So somewhere I think now, on hindsight, I was having it at my hands saying, you know, I am from India. I have no training in this. I don't know how to sell technology. I don't know how this is going to play out. So in my head, I wanted to work harder than anyone else in the room because I knew that was my one shot of getting it right. So I think working very hard became a muscle memory. So even today, friends and family joke that I work like an immigrant. I really work like an immigrant. Even in Bombay, so I'll be working all the time that I have to prove myself, right? That what we are doing, when I say yourself, that whatever work or whatever product or services you're taking forth, your vision, your passion, and your belief really is in that. So getting hard work as second nature was the second thing. And the third and the most important thing was gaining incremental confidence along the way. Like I would get the small wins, whether it's a small 100K project we won in G transportation system in a place in Pennsylvania called Erie in the December of 2000. You know, most of my interviews will have that. For me, it was a very big thing because it was the first project that I pitched and I sold for my company, right? As a young intern, I was still an intern with the company. And the fourth was building a set of people within your company, within your peers, within your colleagues, who would cheer for you when you win, and when you fall, they would just surround you, so that you had the time and the ability to stand up, brush off the hurt, the dust, and the blood, and then keep walking.
And Utkarsh, it's a humbling experience when somebody calls you and says, "Hey, we're organizing a conference on failure, and we'd love for you to be the keynote speaker." I decided to do it, and I didn't know this at the time, but there in the audience while I'm up on stage is a reporter from the New York Times. And fast forward to me sitting in my apartment. At that time, I was living in San Francisco, and there was a full-length article on failure, and my face is the cover of this article. And it turns out that this article goes viral. And so literally at the time, if you would have Googled failure, my face would have been the cover. My face would have been one of your first search results. And so, I think that for me, it made me realize something, that I had sort of spent all of this time really trying to craft this image of success. And the thought that I had at that moment was like, no matter what, no matter in the future, years from now, people are going to be, if people Google my name, that's going to be one of the first things they see is going to be this article on failure outlining all these mishaps, the companies that I tried to start that went nowhere. It may, even though this happened after, talk about the fact that I ran for public office and lost. It's going to be about failure. But a friend of mine gave me a piece of advice around that time that I really took to heart, which was he brought up the Buddha. And he said that, Buddha said that when you feel pain for anything in your life, in your career, for anything, it's really two arrows that are shot. And the first arrow is the arrow that sort of punctures your skin, and you can't really do anything about that arrow. But the second arrow is where you ascribe meaning to that pain. What do you actually do with it? And what I decided to do with it is I decided to take this article and proactively start emailing it out to all these people that I admired. People who I didn't think would meet with me, but I said to them in the email, "Hey, as you can see, I don't know what I'm doing. See this link below. Would you be willing to grab some time, grab some coffee, grab a phone call?" And the response rate to that email was incredibly high, and that really paved the conversations to the book that I wrote.
That you are in the future going to have an ability to sell someone to someone else. And so you're just building, continuous. And what he was referring to was this idea of creator coins that have become very popular. If you look at stuff like BitClout, there's an ability now to create, because of, the crypto world and where Bitcoin has gone, there's now interest in these alternative assets. And people are now saying, hey, I'm going to create a new token. It's going to be based off of me. If you think the value of me is going up, you can buy it. And so my market cap as a person should rise. And, people have been trying to figure out the future of income. Well, they're always trying to figure out the future of income, but it's been gone through a couple of iterations. I mean, maybe 3 years ago, ISAs were all the rage, income share agreement, right, which was another version of how do you sell yourself and say, I think my future self is worth a lot more. So rather than get a loan, I'm going to give up a percentage of my future earnings. And those were, a contract that were popularized through the coding boot camps. I worked at one that briefly did ISAs. Back when I was working there, I think they're doing ISAs.
Is that GA? Are you talking about GA right now?
Exactly. I was at General Assembly for 4.5 years. And so, there's a lot more creative ideas of the future of income. It's not just ISAs, it's not just creator coins. There's another company called Pando Pooling that is working on career pooling, which they're mostly working with athletes today. But you think about, okay, in a sector or a group of people, maybe such as founders, where there's probably a really high failure rate, but the potential outcome of someone who makes it is extremely large, is this idea of a group of people agreeing to kind of share the future resources of whoever makes it out, so to speak. And so they enable people to set up those type of agreements. And then, there's also, gamified life type of companies. There's companies where you can sell your time, you can sell your decisions about your life. There's a company called Nooyi, which people, creators can say, hey, you can tell me what to eat. You can tell me where, what to buy a dog, where to go, what to where, and they are selling their decisions to other people. And so I call that kind of category gamified life. There's all these amazing new ways to earn money that are all just renting out your time, but more interestingly, they're not all just renting anymore. A lot of them are offering investment in yourself as well.
So we don't believe that just policy change will suffice. So if we have to transform markets, technology and finances to come together. Now, how do we do that? Right? We are not a bank. But we have to see how is it that we can solve for market failure by enabling market actors to come in, not solve for market failure by pushing out market actors and replacing them only with the state. And my favorite example there is a program that we launched, formally launched about 6 months ago, but informally launched about a year ago, just as lockdown was kicking in. It's called Powering Livelihoods. And the idea behind that was, and again, it didn't start overnight. We began a research on this in 2016 to look at, is there value in the rural economy for using clean energy for productive purposes, right? Not just to light up a house or to give cooking energy. And we saw that, yes, you can, every second primary health center in the country has poor quality electricity. Every second primary school has no electricity at all. So on the community energy side, there's an opportunity. And then we saw there are already technologies, solar run charkha, a solar based milk chilling machine, a refrigerator, a juicer that can convert multiple different products from aloe vera to oranges into different products, all running on distributed clean energy. We estimated that there was a market size of $50 billion, actually to be exact, $53 billion on and off farm. And say, okay, what do we do with this research? And then it took us, the research took 2 years to come out, and then it took another year and a half, nearly 2 years, to raise money to create a small pot of up to $3 million to ourselves invest in some of these startups. And we got more than 100 applications, whittled down to 6. And partnered with the oldest and largest social enterprise incubator in the country, Will Grow. And CW and Will Grow came together and created Powering Livelihoods, in which we're investing in these startups that are using distributed clean energy for productive purposes. And in the process can create many more micro entrepreneurs. And our estimation is in the long supply chain, up to 1 million jobs could be created. So again, it's partly looking over the horizon. It's partly finding a niche that nobody's looking at distributed energy for this area. And it's not trying to control policy here. Policy here is following the market. Less than 2 months after Powering Livelihoods was launched, the government came out with a specific policy on promoting clean energy, distributed clean energy for livelihoods.
This comes from a study I did that might be the most, I think, important I've ever done, at least in terms of changing my own thinking and flying in the face of expectations of scholars of habit. I was really interested.
Adam, rethinking.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yes. Great connection to one of my favorite thinkers at Wharton and a brilliant colleague. I did this experiment at Google to test a hypothesis my collaborator, John Bashirs of Harvard Business School, and I had about sort of an ideal way to kickstart lasting habits. And I should say we were building on the shoulders of giants, lots of great research, particularly by Wendy Wood of USC, who's a amazing scholar of habit, suggested that habits are formed in a way that's, I think, by the way, been well publicized and written about. The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, Atomic Habits both popularized this idea that there's sort of a simple loop where, if you take an action repeatedly under the sort of same circumstances, and then you reward that action, you're going to build a habit that lasts. And so I was influenced by all of that work and wanted to see if we could turn that into I'll say like a behavior change kickstart program. So we teamed up with Google. They were interested in getting more of their employees using gyms regularly. There are a lot of employees who wanted to improve their wellness. So 2,500 Googlers signed up for this program we developed to try to see if we could help them build lasting habits. And our hypothesis was if we could create more consistency in the way people were engaging in their exercise, that would be really critical to creating a lasting habit. So we built a 1-month program, and we randomly assigned some people to get encouragement to visit the gym basically at the same time of day every time they went. So everybody in our study actually told us what's the ideal time for them. And some people got sort of bonus rewards for a month if their visits to the gym were within this narrow time interval. Another group also planned when they like to go to the gym, told us their best time, but they got the same rewards regardless of when they went to the gym. And what we ended up with is 2 groups who went to the gym at the same frequency for a month, but one of whom went at much more consistent times. So like they were, say 7 a.m. was their ideal time, like 85% of their workouts were at that time. And another group who say also chose that as their ideal time, but only about half of their workouts were at that time. They worked out in a much wider range of times. Okay, same frequency, different levels of flexibility, sort of different levels of variety in when they did this activity. Okay, then the program ends. We let go. And what we're really interested in is which group has built a more lasting habit and will keep going to the gym. Is it the group that has been sort of really consistently going at the same time, or the group that's been going in a less regular, routinized way? We were sure it was going to be the group that was consistent, and we were wrong. And here's why. When we dug into the data, what we found is those people who had sort of gone at the same time so consistently, they were a little bit more likely, say they were a 7 a.m. workout person, they were slightly more likely to keep going at 7 a.m. than someone else who had a more flexible schedule throughout the month when we were trying to kickstart a habit. So that was true, that it built this sort of 7 a.m. workout habit a little bit more. But if they didn't go at 7 a.m., they didn't go at all. So they become really rigid. So if they didn't hit their sort of ideal workout time, they threw up their hands and gave up. Whereas the flexible folks, the people who'd been going at different times, they went at slightly less at their sort of magic time, their ideal time. But if they missed their 7 a.m. workout, well, then maybe they go at noon, or maybe they go at 5 p.m. They learn to be flexible as opposed to rigid around achieving this goal and getting their exercise in. And I thought this was such an important insight, and realized sort of as soon as we started analyzing the data and recognizing, wow, I see this in so much of life, that if we become too rigid in the way we try to achieve our goals or build our habits, that actually is the enemy of consistency, because life gets in the way. Life is not a perfect, it's not always going to be possible to do things at the same time in the same place. And so ideally what we're building when we build a habit or a routine is there is an ideal time, but we've learned how to do it no matter what, not only under this very specific set of circumstances. So I think that was a really important insight from the work that I share in the book.
At that point, you realize that Netflix, with that one show, perhaps got so much more traction than all the content you had put all your life's work into.
Yeah.
And you realize that was the Netflix effect. But coming to your question about how do you end up on something like that, I hadn't imagined it in my wildest dreams. In fact, that wasn't something that I wanted to do. The kind of offers that I was getting were eventually to do things on BBC, to do things on OTT where they don't reveal whether it's Netflix. Because often what happens is the model is such where they create that content and then they sell it to these OTT players. So it's going to end up hopefully on a Amazon Prime or a Netflix, but we're not quite sure because it's the highest bidder who wins. In this scenario, strangely enough, I was getting feature film offers, like stuff like an interesting football film, or to also do a voiceover for
like to be an actor, to be an actor.
Got it. But you'd be surprised if an engineer or an architect puts up a fantastic visual CV, it might make sure that you have that novelty and that uniqueness when someone actually clicks on your link. But yeah, in this scenario with Netflix, it was interesting because it was right up your alley, and they actually approached one of my colleagues at Bloomberg, who was still tied down by contract over there. And he said, look, yeah, the guy who I think, and this is why I really respect him. He said, the guy who's right for you is a guy who's in the middle of Jamshedpur right now doing a football match, hosting the Indian Super League, because he's the guy who would be ideal for you. And I got a call from the producers from London, and I thought, honestly, Utkarsh, so many people approach you, from PR people, marketing people for collaborations, content creation. There's a lot of people who approach you in a day, and I generally thought it was one of those calls. So I said, hey, you know what? Hi, thank you so much. And it was a call from London, and first I want to make sure it wasn't a scam caller. I got 2 scam calls today itself, asking me to give my Aadhaar ID, other one asking me for Forex trading. And I said, she sounded great, and she had a great idea. And she said, look, Ayush, these are the things we want to talk about. I said, look, this is what I can talk about. This is what I won't talk about. And then she said, can you send me some of your links? I sent some of my links from my shows, and the executive producer really liked it. And they said, this is the guy we've been looking for. And they said, we're flying down. Either we fly you down or you fly down. And I said, great. I'm free on these days. I had a 2-week break on the Indian Super League. So I said, great, I will come down. We went to Goregaon in the suburbs of Bombay. And frankly speaking, there was almost zero prep.
We tend to think that our love lives have nothing to do with our economic lives. So, there's a serious book that I could write, right, which would just be sort of a bunch of stuffy numbers and a bunch of theories on women in the economy. But I think all feminist economists and feminists know that love, care, our social relationships are the economy. The economy is a set of relationships. It's not just soulless transactions between people. And I think in writing the book, that was something I was very conscious of, which is I didn't want the reader to feel daunted by the statistics. And I didn't want the reader to feel as if they were drowning in information, because there are almost 60 pages of references in the book, and there's a lot of data in there. But I wanted the reader to understand and enter the data, but in a much more accessible way through the stories, and really understand the sentiment that, as I said, the statistics hold. That was very important to me, I think, as a project, and just thinking through what I was trying to do. And if there was a talisman I had, I think that was the talisman, which is that if someone who is absolutely not versed in development economics, it doesn't work in public policy, has nothing to do with journalism, if they picked up the book, would they be able to enter the lives of women and understand the data without feeling exhausted by it? And that was very important to me, and I think that required a certain amount of lightness of touch, which I'm hoping, I think, as more people will read, they'll react to.
And I'll put it in 2 terms. One is what I call the network effect, and the other is the making capital out of it, not because of the name of the organization, but because those are 2 different thematics. The network effect is partially serendipity, having a mind which is febrile and which wanders, the ability to pull those strings together under pressure, the willingness to accept pressure of any kind. That's one. The capital you build on it is built on, shall I say, having audacious goals. So, for example, most people will be shocked that in the business of PR, which is the 3rd or 4th business that I got into, the first client I had with no capital, no office, was Pepsi, global giant. And I understood their pain point in one conversation with the CEO, who happened to be a senior to me in school, going back to networks and going back to accidents and serendipity. And I found out that his pain point was not about what he was receiving as advice in PR. It was that he was pissed off that this giant American firm, which was giving him PR services in India, was charging him by the hour. So he said, in my budgeting in India, I can't budget for X lakhs 1 month and Y lakhs the next month, because that's the way the American firm charges by the hour and gives me a bill. I want the certainty of a budget figure, which I can put for the year. So I said, that's easy. I'll quote you a figure for the month, and I promise you that I won't change irrespective of what you ask me to do. So he said, do you have a company? I said, no. He said, how long will you take to start a company? Luckily, in those days, it took only 12 days, despite socialism. And
that is surprising for all of us.
I didn't have a company either. So I said, okay, I went off to find a friend whose husband was a chartered accountant, and her husband said, sure, but we'll get you a name of a company and get you an account, but by the time the company is formed, it will take some time. I said, that's fine, because I knew the check would only come after a month. He said, don't worry, it'll be all set by then. And I went and called a friend of mine who was the CEO of another PR company at that time. And I said, will you join me? He said, for what? I said, yeah, we'll start a PR company from tomorrow. He said, he was on the verge of quitting there anyway. So I said, fine, let's start.
I think, to me, a few key things, a few pivotal moments or learning moments for me as I grew in the management chain was the first time. The first time when you become a manager, and then I went to a manager, I was leading large teams, and then again chose to take an IC role, and then again went back to management. Both the times when I first made the switch, the first bumpy ride is because if you are a high performing individual contributor, it's just so hard to let go. It's just so hard to enable others and to trust others to do a job that you thought you could do you could do it in the best possible way, right? So that tendency to roll up your sleeve, to jump, and especially if you're a hustler, and I'm a hustler, I've always been a hustler, it's just so hard to restrain. So that to me was the first learning moment of how do you switch from becoming the doer to the enabler. That's the first point that everybody hits, and I've seen a lot of my reports who are high performing, when they become managers, they hit, and it's such a key thing to learn. So that was first. And then just continuously growing in terms of then starting to invest in growing people, in understanding what exactly are their career motivators. That's what brought me here, people who championed for me, people who invested in me. And it's a big part of my job now to understand each person's skill sets, because everybody is we have a Swiss Army knife, right? Everybody's different, everybody has a different skill set, and product management is just, it gives space for so many different styles. There are product managers who are great at business, some who are great at technical, some who are great at product thinking, some who are great at UX. How do you recognize and identify the skills and give each person the opportunity to grow? And so just making them enablers is a big thing. And the point that you made about upward management as well as team management, then your role shifts from being the doer, like I said, to enabler. And a big part of that is context sharing, because now you are suddenly at a point, where you have a broader perspective. There was this talk I was in where some person was saying, literally he showed a picture of a cliff, and then there are people who are actually working in the weeds, and super important job. They're the ones who are crafting everything. And then as you keep growing, you're now getting far and away from the weeds. You don't see the details anymore, but you're seeing a broader perspective, which they can't see because they're not there. And so how do you share that broader perspective with them? Right now, my job is all about enabling them. And a key part of it is sharing context, giving that broader perspective so that they understand that, okay, this is my feature, this is how it connects to the product, this is how the product connects to the larger business, this is how the larger business connects to the company. That's sort of the perspective sharing, because now you have it. And I think that's the key. And that's been a huge learning curve for me, a learning moment for me, in fact, because that's the best way to enable someone to grow.